Hello and welcome to episode 10, the final episode of our series 10 Steps to Help Your Church Grow. This is the final episode, but it's not the end of the story. So keep that in mind. And I've said before in some of the previous episodes that a lot of the things that we talked about, the first four in particular, when we were talking about laying the foundation, we talked about purposeful prayer. We talked about the church climate, about conflict management, and about celebrating success. And all of those things are ongoing. All of those are things that you'll continually need to be doing and engaged in. And then in our second section, drafting plans, that was a little bit more chronological. The vision does need to be re-examined every few years and may need to be tweaked periodically. The reorientation will have to move with that. And your programming is something that you're going to want to evaluate probably every year or two to make sure things are still effective and to ask, where are we missing things? What needs to be introduced still? Where programs losing their effectiveness and how can we help them be more effective? And in this final section, building disciples, I've said a couple of times, it's a cycle. People start outside of the community of faith. And it's through evangelism and outreach that they're invited in to the community of faith, that they begin this process of holistic discipleship. And then as they participate in the community of faith, they begin to develop spiritual maturity. And eventually they sort of become proper disciples when they choose to embrace spiritual maturity and take the responsibility for their own spiritual maturity. And then as they continue to mature, they continually embrace more fully and more deeply Jesus' mission, the work that he left for us to do. And that naturally by necessity transitions as we mature spiritually and embrace Jesus' mission. It transitions to this final step, which is not final at all because this is a cycle. And this final, we're calling it the final step of mobilizing people in ministry. As we reach spiritual maturity, as we recognize the importance of Jesus' mission, as we embrace the work that he set out for us to do, we very naturally and by necessity become people on a mission. We become people engaged in ministry. I talked a fair bit in the last episode about the importance in developing spiritual maturity of more mature people reaching out to less mature people and investing in them, about this transition of taking not only your own spiritual maturity seriously, but of beginning to take other people's spiritual maturity seriously. And that's part of this step, mobilizing people in ministry, us becoming mobilized in mission and in ministry. As we mature, we recognize the responsibility that all believers have to be engaged in the work and the life of the church. If we're going to be spiritually mature, if we're going to be disciples, we have to be active participants in some version of the local church. We have to be living in a community of faith where we're demonstrating and experiencing God's love and forgiveness and grace as we interact with one another. We need to be engaging in using our spiritual gifts as part of the community of faith that we belong to nurture it, to grow it, to support it. And part of that work is learning to share our story and participating in the work of outreach and evangelism. Part of that is using our gifts to support the church however it needs it. For some people, the gifts are very naturally going to align with outreach or evangelism. For others, those spiritual gifts will very naturally align with helping people foster spiritual maturity. For some people, those gifts might align more naturally with things that we're shying away from a little in this conversation. Some people's spiritual gift will align with maintaining the building or the property that the church meets in. And even though we've talked several times about how the focus of the church and the programming of the church needs to move away from that and be oriented towards the goals, be oriented towards the future, it is still a vital ministry of the church that there are people who are caring for the needs of the building, people who are caring for the maintenance of what exists. And so I don't want, if you're watching these videos and you feel like, well, gosh, my gift is holding us back, that's the wrong message. That's not what I want you to hear. If your spiritual gifts are focused on maintaining what's there, on keeping up the building, those sorts of things, those are important gifts that God gave you because that's important work. So don't hear that you're holding the church back. That is not true. Use your gifts to meet that need of the church. But do it recognizing that you are supporting a work that's moving us forward. Your spiritual gift might be about maintaining what we have, what your church has, but you're supporting the vital work of the church moving forward into something new. You're freeing up, by exercising your gift, you're freeing up somebody whose gift is oriented towards the goal to go and do that work instead of having to, by necessity, do the work that really you're gifted for. So there's nothing wrong with being gifted for a maintenance-oriented ministry, but the orientation of the church as a whole needs to be towards moving towards what God has called us to, and you enable that work when you use your gift. All that is to say that we further God's mission, we further the ministry of the church as we grow in maturity and find opportunities to serve each other, to serve the community around us. We use our spiritual gifts, whatever gifts God has given us, in service of that vision, in service of that mission. And the more we grow in understanding who God is, the more we grow in understanding who we are in Christ, the more we grow in understanding our gifts and our calling, the more we'll naturally want to be engaged in reaching out to others, in reaching out to less mature disciples, whatever God has gifted us for, whichever group, whatever segment of that journey of discipleship our goals and our passions are most closely connected with, we need to put that into practice. We ourselves need to mobilize in ministry. And as we foster spiritual maturity in others, we need to guide them towards that as well. We need to make it a regular part of church culture, a regular expectation that people who are part of the church will be actively engaged in using their spiritual gifts and doing the ministry, doing the mission, the work of the church. We did ourselves a real disservice as a church when we started professionalizing every job in the church. And don't get me wrong, there are some strength, there are some merits to having professional staff for a church. It gives people a lot more time to invest in their work because they don't have to have a day job. It allows you to get a higher caliber of person than you might get if you were limited only to volunteers from your congregation. But when we started professionalizing youth ministry and music and all of these things, one of the downsides was it created this idea that the ministry of the church was handled by professionals, and the people in the pews weren't responsible for doing any of that. The people in the pews became consumers, and the people that they hired became producers. And that is not how the church is supposed to work. And as we grow in our understanding of the church and how it is supposed to work, we start to move away from that. We start to recognize the call for a priesthood of all believers. We start to recognize what it means when Paul talks about us all being one body that has concern for every part of it, and how we all use our gifts together to be a healthy whole. And as we grow in that understanding, we start to recognize that ministry is not the purview, not the dominion of just one or two or a handful of staff people. It's something that every believer, every mature believer is called to. And we need to help we ourselves need to recognize that and need to actively engage in ministry. And we need to help other people as they're growing in their faith to understand that, to recognize it. We need to foster that expectation that the ministry of the church won't just be done by professionals, but that it's normal and right for every person in the congregation to find roles, to find ways to be engaged. And as we foster that, suddenly we'll find more resources available for programming. We'll find more resources available for staffing the ministries that we have and for starting new ministries. And I said when we were doing the evangelism and outreach video, right now a lot of people might not feel comfortable doing that, but as people grow in their spiritual maturity and as they reach this point of recognizing the need to be in ministry, that's going to naturally carry at least some, if not all of them, back to that first step of saying, I know that I need to further Christ's ministry here on the earth. I know that I need to participate in the mission of the church. And so I'm going to find opportunities to share about what God's done in my life. I'm going to find opportunities to explain the hope that I have. I'm going to use my spiritual gifts, whatever they are, to build up the church. And that's where we come full circle. The people who started out on the outside have grown in faith, grown in maturity, grown in fellowship with each other and with God to the point that they're ready to reach out and to begin that work anew. And we align our programming with that to help people take those steps from outsider to insider to leader and minister. And as we help people to move through that process, we are building disciples. We are living out the mission that Christ has set for us. And we will experience a new health in our congregation that probably none of us even remember ever experiencing in the congregation before. Your church will have experienced it before when it was first founded. And for some churches, like the one I'm serving right now, that was about 200 years ago. and there's no one left alive who remembers that actual phase. But we can experience new health as we embrace Christ's mission, as we embrace the vision that God has for our congregation, as we realign our resources around it, and as we begin this cycle of holistic discipleship, where we invite people in, help to foster their spiritual growth, and equip them and engage them in ministry themselves. So I hope this series was informational. I hope it all made sense. I hope that you'll take it seriously and that you'll actually try these things out, because a lot of good research shows that these things will help your church grow, and I believe they will. So give it a shot. Let me know how it goes.